Welcome, sleepwalkers. Make sure to lock your doors. Please like and subscribe before you pass out. Here's today's video. The Well House, Part 2. I heard scraping sounds from outside, not from the well house, but from the yard itself. Looking out the window, I watched in horrified fascination as the wooden figures began to move. But they weren't walking or moving under their own power. Instead, they were being dragged across the ground by some hidden string, their wooden bodies scraping against the earth as they were pulled toward the well house. One by one, they arranged themselves in their familiar circle around the stone building. But this time, I could see what happened next. The door of the well house swung open, revealing not the innocent stone interior I'd glimpsed during the day, but something else entirely. The space inside seemed vast, extending down into darkness that my eyes couldn't penetrate, and from that darkness, something was climbing up. It took forever, whatever it was. I could hear the scraping of fingers or claws against stone, the wet sound of something pulling itself hand over hand up an impossible distance. The wooden figures stood motionless around the perimeter, like tiny sentinels keeping watch. Finally, pale fingers appeared at the edge of the well house doorway, then a hand, then an arm. What emerged was almost human, but wrong in ways that made my mind recoil. Too thin, too pale, joints bending in directions that shouldn't be possible. Its face was a blank expanse of white, with dark hollows where eyes should have been. The thing stood in the doorway of the well house, swaying slightly as if testing its balance in the upper world. Then it turned toward my house with unerring accuracy, though it had no visible eyes to see me with. I scrambled backward from the window, knocking over my coffee mug, but I couldn't stop watching. The pale figure began to walk across the field, its movement wrong and jerky, leaving deep gouges in the earth with each step. Behind it, the wooden figures were being dragged along in formation, their carved bodies bouncing and scraping across the ground as they followed. They were coming to the house. I ran to the front door and checked the locks, then did the same with the back door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the deadbolts. But what protection were locks against something that could manipulate objects without touching them? The footsteps on the back porch were soft but deliberate. I heard the thing testing the door handle, then moving to the windows. It was looking for a way in, and I had the terrible certainty that it would find one. But as the first light of dawn began to creep across the horizon, the sound stopped. I crept to the window and saw the pale figure walking back toward the well house, the wooden figures being dragged behind it in their orderly procession. By the time the sun was fully up, they had all disappeared back into whatever depths they'd emerged from. I found Sarah's journal and read the rest of her entries with growing dread. May 12th. It came to the house last night. I saw it clearly, pale, wrong, not quite human. The wooden figures were being pulled behind it like some kind of funeral procession. It tried all the doors and windows but couldn't get in. I think there's some rule that keeps it out. Unless... May 15th. Found a section of the basement wall that's different from the rest. Newer stone, different mortar. Something was walled up down there, and recently. The sound of scratching comes from behind it sometimes. May 18th. The dreams are constant now. In them, I'm not drawing water from the well. I'm going down into it. Something is waiting for me in the depths. Something that feeds on more than just flesh. It wants to preserve what it consumes, to keep the essence trapped forever. May 20th. I understand now. The well house isn't just a building, it's a feeding chamber. And the thing that lives down there needs someone to sustain it, to keep it strong enough to honor the old agreement. The wooden figures aren't decorations. They're the souls of everyone who came before. May 22nd, last night I found myself walking toward the well house without consciously deciding to go. The pale thing was waiting for me, holding out something that looked like a wooden figure but was different from the others. This one had a face carved into it. My face. When I woke up this morning, it was on my nightstand. The final entry was dated just a week before I'd arrived, May 25th. I can't fight it anymore. Every night I get closer to the well house. The pale thing is patient, but insistent. It shows me the carved figure with my face, and I understand what it means. My body will feed the creature, but my soul will be preserved in the wood, forced to watch and wait as others are brought to take my place. I'm leaving tonight while I still can, but I know it will follow me. The agreement must be maintained. Someone else will come, someone who can see the wooden figures for what they really are. God forgive me for what I'm bringing to whoever comes next. I set the journal down with trembling hands. Sarah had left me here to face this alone, but what exactly was I facing? And what was this agreement she'd mentioned? That night, I didn't even pretend to try sleeping. I sat at the kitchen table with every light in the house blazing, watching the well house. At 3:17 a.m., the internet went down, and the wooden figures began their nightly procession. But this time, when the pale thing emerged from the well house, it was carrying something. A wooden figure, more detailed than the others. Even from a distance I could see it had a carved face. My face. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, after another sleepless night of watching the pale thing circle my house with its wooden army, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I was going to break into the well house. Mr. Henley had said the foundation was unstable, but I'd been watching the building for weeks now. It was solid stone, probably built to last centuries. Whatever he was trying to keep me away from, it wasn't structural damage. I found a crowbar in the basement and waited until midday, when the sun was brightest and my courage was highest. The walk across the field felt like miles, even though I knew it was only 50 yards. The wooden figures were back on my windowsill. I'd found them there that morning, arranged in their usual watching formation. The padlock was old but solid. It took me 20 minutes of prying and swearing before it finally snapped. The door swung open with a groan of ancient hinges, revealing nothing like what I'd expected. The interior was much larger than the outside walls suggested, extending back into pitch-black shadows. But it wasn't the size that made my breath catch, it was the walls. Every surface was covered in carved symbols, layer upon layer of them, as if generations of people had added their marks over decades or centuries. Some looked Native American, others resembled Celtic knots or Norse runes, and still others were unlike anything I'd ever seen. And in the center of the room was the well. It was perfectly circular, lined with fitted stones that descended into absolute darkness. No matter how I strained my eyes, I couldn't see the bottom, but I could hear something down there, a wet, sliding sound, like something large moving through water. Around the rim of the well, someone had arranged fresh animal bones, rabbit skulls, deer ribs, the hollow skeleton of what might have been a raccoon. They formed a perfect circle, and each bone was carved with the same symbols that covered the walls. I knelt by the well's edge and looked down. The darkness was so complete, it seemed solid, like black velvet. But as I stared, I began to see faint shapes moving in the depths. Something pale, with too many joints, climbing slowly upward. A sound behind me made me spin around. In the doorway of the well house stood Mr. Henley, but not as I'd ever seen him before. His face was haggard, his eyes hollow with the weight of terrible knowledge. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Not until you understand what you're part of." "What agreement?" I managed to whisper. Mr. Henley stepped into the well house, his movements careful and deliberate. "This land was purchased with promises, Maya. My great-great-grandfather made a deal with what lives below. Protection for the town, bountiful harvests, mild winters, prosperity for generations. In exchange, we provide what it needs." I backed toward the well, which seemed like a mistake the moment I did it. "Provide what?" "Sustenance." His gaze was filled with sorrow. "The creature down there is ancient, older than the town, older than the first settlers. It feeds on human flesh, but that's not all it takes. It preserves the soul, traps it in carved wood to serve as eternal guardians." "The wooden figures," I whispered. "Every person who's been offered to maintain the agreement. Their bodies feed the creature, but their essence lives on in the wood, bound to watch over the boundary between our world and its hunger." I looked down into the well again. The pale shape was much closer now, maybe 20 feet below the rim. I could see its face clearly, smooth white skin stretched over a skull that was possibly a different species of human. Its mouth was a dark gash, filled with needle-sharp teeth. "I won't do it," I said. "I won't be your sacrifice." Mr. Henley's expression was infinitely sad. "You already are, child. The moment you arranged the wooden figures on your windowsill, you accepted the role. The moment you found Sarah's journal and didn't run, you committed yourself. The creature has been feeding on your dreams for weeks, learning your essence, preparing to preserve you." As if summoned by his words, the pale thing's hand appeared at the rim of the well. Its fingers were impossibly long, ending in black claws that scraped against the stone. I stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. "The town depends on this agreement," Mr. Henley continued, his voice becoming more urgent. "Before we started feeding it, the creature would emerge on its own. Whole families disappeared in the night. Children were found drained of blood, their bodies twisted into impossible shapes. Livestock died by the hundreds. Crops failed year after year. The pale thing hauled itself up over the rim of the well with fluid grace. Standing, it was nearly 7 feet tall, its elongated limbs giving it the appearance of a spider that had learned to walk upright. When it turned toward me, I saw that its face wasn't blank after all. There were eyes, dark and deep as the well itself, filled with an intelligence that was older than anything people had ever built on this land. "But with the agreement," Mr. Henley said, "the town thrives. Our children are safe, our harvests are plentiful. One life every so often in exchange for the prosperity of hundreds." The creature moved toward me with deliberate slowness, as if it had all the time in the world. Its gaze never left my face, and I could feel something cold probing at the edges of my mind. "Sarah tried to run," I said desperately. "She got away." Mr. Henley shook his head sadly. "Sarah never left the property. She's in the basement of the farmhouse, behind the newer stones. It's where I put all the girls that won't cooperate. Her soul joined the wooden watchers the night she tried to escape in her own way. But you will serve your purpose." "What purpose?" I asked. "To keep the creature fed and content until the next caretaker arrives." The pale thing reached out one impossibly long arm and touched my forehead with a finger that felt like ice. Images flooded my mind, visions of the town's founding, of Mr. Henley's great-great-grandfather signing papers in his own blood, of decades of carefully selected sacrifices. I saw Sarah weeping with a razor blade in her hand as she bled out, choosing not to feed the creature, and I saw myself standing at the rim of the well in the gray light of dawn, my body growing cold as the creature fed, my consciousness slowly transferring to carved wood where it would remain forever. The process is painless, Mr. Henley said gently, and you'll still be aware, still be part of something important. The town will remember you as a saint. The pale thing smiled with its terrible mouth and began to guide me towards the well. But before it could complete the ritual, voices echoed from outside, car doors slamming, people calling my name. Maya, Maya, are you here? They weren't supposed to come. Mr. Henley's face went pale. The creature's head snapped toward the sound, its dark eyes narrowing. For the first time since I'd seen it, the thing looked genuinely agitated. It released my arm and moved to the well house doorway, peering out at the approaching voices. Maya, we tried calling but couldn't reach you. The voice was closer now, maybe halfway across the field. We have some revisions to discuss. Mr. Henley grabbed my arm roughly. You have to get rid of them. Send them away, or they'll all become part of this. The creature won't tolerate witnesses. I looked at the pale thing, which had begun to make a low rumbling sound in its throat. Its fingers were flexing, claws extending and retracting as if it was preparing to hunt. Tell them you're sick, Mr. Henley hissed. Tell them anything, but make them leave. I stumbled toward the doorway on shaking legs. Through the opening, I could see 3 people in business attire picking their way across the field toward the well house. My clients, people who had trusted me with their biggest rebrand in company history. I'm here, I called out, my voice cracking. But this isn't a good time. Maya? The lead voice belonged to Janet, the marketing director. We were worried when you didn't respond to our emails. Are you all right? Behind me, the creature had retreated back toward the well, but its agitation was growing. The rumbling in its throat had become a low growl, and I could feel malevolent hunger radiating from it like heat. I'm fine, I shouted, just working on the project. Can we reschedule for next week? But they were still approaching. Through the doorway, I could see Janet's concerned expression. I could see the way she was looking at the well house with professional curiosity. Is that some kind of historical building? She called. It's fascinating. Mind if we take a quick look? The creature let out a sound that made my bones ache. Part shriek, part roar. Utterly inhuman. Mr. Henley grabbed my shoulder. They're not leaving, he said desperately. It's going to kill them all, Maya. You have to... But I was already moving. I pushed past him and ran toward the well house entrance, shouting warnings even as I heard the creature's footsteps behind me. Run! Get back to your car. There's something wrong here. Janet and her team stopped, confusion replacing curiosity on their faces. But they were too close now, close enough to see into the well house, close enough to see the pale figure that emerged behind me with its impossible limbs and needle teeth. What happened next was chaos, screaming, running, the creature moving with fluid grace as it pursued the fleeing business people across the field. Mr. Henley was shouting something about the agreement being broken, about consequences that would fall on the entire town. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was running too, following Janet and her team toward their rental car, praying we could all reach it before the creature caught us. We almost made it. The creature took Janet first, its elongated arms reaching her. Just as she reached for the car door handle, her screams cut off abruptly as those terrible claws found their mark. And then she was being dragged back toward the well house with inhuman speed. The other 2, David from accounting and Sarah from design, made it to the car. I dove into the back seat as David fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip them. "What was that thing?" Sarah sobbed from the passenger seat. "What the hell was that?" "Drive," I gasped. "Just drive." The engine roared to life and David floored the accelerator, gravel spraying as we tore down the long driveway. In the rear window, I could see the pale creature standing in the field, Janet's motionless form at its feet. It wasn't pursuing us anymore. It was simply watching, those dark eyes fixed on our fleeing car with what might have been satisfaction. We made it to town in record time, screeching to a halt in front of the sheriff's office. But when we stumbled inside, gasping out our story of monsters and murder, the deputy's expression grew carefully neutral. "Now, folks, I know Maya here has been having some troubles with isolation," he said patiently. "Sometimes the mind can play tricks when you're alone too long. Are you sure you didn't just see a bear? They can look mighty strange when they rear up on their hind legs." "A bear?" David's voice cracked. "That thing was 7 feet tall and white as bone. It killed Janet." The deputy nodded sympathetically and made notes that I was sure would never be filed. "Tell you what, why don't we all drive out there together and take a look? I'm sure we'll find a reasonable explanation." But when we returned to the farmhouse an hour later, there was no sign of Janet or the creature. The well house door was closed and padlocked, exactly as it had been when I'd first arrived. The wooden figures sat peacefully on my kitchen windowsill, facing inward toward the house. The only evidence that anything had happened was a dark stain on the ground near the well house that the deputy dismissed as old motor oil. "Sometimes traumatic experiences can cause shared hallucinations," he explained to David and Sarah as they stared at the innocent-looking stone building. "Group hysteria, they call it. Happens more often than you'd think." David and Sarah left that evening, shaken and confused, but apparently convinced that they'd somehow imagined the whole thing. The human mind, I realized, had a remarkable ability to rationalize away the impossible, but I knew what I'd seen, and I knew what Mr. Henley had told me about the agreement. That night, I packed my things with grim determination. I would leave this place, return to Portland, and never look back. Let Mr. Henley find another sacrifice to maintain his town's prosperity. I was done being part of their ancient bargain, but when I reached for my car keys, my hand stopped midway to the hook by the door. I tried again, but my arm simply wouldn't obey. The compulsion was already too strong. Instead, I found myself walking to the kitchen table, where a piece of wood and a carving knife had appeared while I was in town. Without conscious thought, my hands began to work, guided by skills I didn't know I possessed. The face that emerged from the wood was my own, but changed. Older, sadder, with eyes that had seen too much. When it was finished, I set it on the windowsill with the others and noticed something that chilled me to the bone. One of the figures had Janet's face now, her features carved with the same resigned despair I'd seen in all the others. Over the following days, I tried calling the authorities, tried contacting anyone who might listen to my story, but every time I reached for the phone, the compulsion had stopped me. The creature had marked me, claimed me, and there was no escaping the role I'd been chosen to play. My old life felt distant now, like memories from someone else's existence. What mattered was the rhythm of the well house, the nightly emergence of the pale thing, the careful maintenance of the boundary that kept the ancient hunger from consuming everything. At dawn and dusk, I found myself walking to the well house with offerings. The creature accepted them graciously, its terrible smile never changing, but I could see in its ancient eyes that it was still hungry, that eventually it would require more substantial feeding. The wooden figures watched everything from their posts around the property. During the day they stood motionless, but at night I could see them being dragged into new positions by unnamed forces, maintaining their vigil. Sometimes I thought I could hear them whispering to each other in voices like wind through pine needles. 3 weeks after Janet's disappearance, Mr. Henley came to visit. He found me in the garden, tending vegetables I didn't remember planting. "The town council is pleased with how you've adapted," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "The crops are coming in better than they have in years. The children are sleeping soundly. Even the weather has been unusually mild." I nodded but didn't look up from the tomatoes. "How many others have there been?" "Caretakers, dozens, over the decades. Some last longer than others. You seem particularly suited to the role." "Because I don't fight it anymore?" "Because you understand what's at stake." He gestured toward the town visible in the distance. "One person's sacrifice in exchange for the well-being of so many. It's not such a terrible trade." But I wasn't listening to his justifications anymore. I was thinking about the carved figure with my face, sitting on the windowsill with all the others, waiting for the day when my body would feed the creature and my consciousness would transfer to the wood, leaving me trapped forever in a prison of carved pine. That night, I found myself unconsciously adding details to the wooden figure, deepening the lines around the eyes, refining the expression of sorrow. When I was finished, I placed it back on the windowsill and noticed that all the other figures had turned to face it. They were welcoming me home. Outside, the pale creature began its nightly climb from the depths, ready for another day of patient watching, patient feeding, patient maintenance of the agreement that bound us all. I stood at the window and watched it emerge, no longer afraid, but not yet resigned. The town slept peacefully in the distance, their children safe in their beds, their crops growing strong in the fertile soil. The price of their prosperity stood in my kitchen, carved in wood and watching with dead eyes. Soon, I thought, very soon now, I would join them, but not tonight. Tonight I would sit and write, adding my own entries to Sarah's journal, leaving a record for whoever came next. Maybe they would be stronger than I was. Maybe they would find a way to break the cycle that had claimed so many before me. Or maybe they would simply join the circle, as we all did eventually. The pale creature smiled at me through the window, and I found myself smiling back, feeling my humanity slip away one careful piece at a time. My fingers moved to the wooden knife waiting on the table, ready for the final carving that would complete my transformation. The wooden figures watched from their posts, patient and eternal, their vigil never ending. And somewhere in the depths of the well, ancient hunger stirred and settled, satisfied for now but always waiting, always ready for the next offering that would keep the old agreement alive. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of scraping stone, as something far below began its long climb toward the surface once again.